The first thing I remember was that smell. Thick, oily, and wrong. We'd just finished setting up camp in a hollow at the base of some sandstone bluffs out in eastern Utah, a spot I'd found marked only by an old survey marker and a faint game trail. The sun was setting, the red rocks cooling from their daytime heat, and everything seemed perfect until that stench rolled through camp like an invisible wave. It hit us mid-conversation. Me, Dan, and Elise, standing around the fire ring we'd just dug. I gagged before I even knew why. Elise clamped her shirt over her mouth, and Dan just stood there, staring into the dark like the source might show itself. At first, we thought something had died nearby. A coyote, maybe a cow. We scoured the area with headlamps, but the light just bounced off red dirt and sagebrush, nothing but the buzz of insects and the wind whining between the cliffs. The smell was worse near the ground, damp and metallic, almost like hot pennies mixed with rotting seaweed. I caught myself breathing shallowly, afraid to take it in. We tried to laugh it off. Sulphur Springs, Dan said. Though we'd seen no sign of water within half a mile, Elise guessed maybe some kind of algae bloom in a hidden pool. But it lingered, relentless, seeping into our clothes, our gear, our throats. When we started the fire, the smoke didn't even cover it. If anything, the heat made it stronger. By midnight, none of us could sleep. Every time the wind shifted, the smell returned, dense enough to make our eyes sting. Dan wandered off with a shovel, muttering about buried trash or old chemical drums. He came back half an hour later with dirt smeared across his hands and a hollow look in his eyes. "Nothing," he said. "Just rock and sand." We tried moving camp up the ridge, but even there the air carried it, faint but constant. Elise said she could taste it, like rust on her tongue. My stomach churned. I could feel it in my chest, heavy and sour. Around 2 a.m. the wind died completely, and the smell thickened until it felt like a fog pressing against our skin. I remember thinking, absurdly, that maybe the earth was breathing through a wound we couldn't see. That's when we noticed the faint shimmer in the sand below the bluffs, a patch maybe 30 feet wide that seemed to glisten even in the dim starlight. Dan thought it was wet, though the air was bone dry. He started toward it before Elise grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said quietly, but I could see curiosity working its way through him, the same pull I felt, a need to know what was making that awful smell. Dan pulled free from Elise's grip and started down toward that shimmering patch, his boots crunching softly in the grit. The light from his headlamp caught the surface, and for a moment it really did look wet, like a puddle of oil trapped in the sand. But as he got closer, the beam showed something stranger. The ground wasn't damp at all. It was dry but alive, with movement like countless translucent threads writhing beneath the surface. He crouched, muttered something none of us caught, and the smell hit all at once, sharp and sulphurous, but layered now with something electric, almost ionized. It burned in my nose like ozone before a lightning strike. Elise and I gagged, stumbling back toward the ridge. Dan yelled, "It's coming out of the ground!" His voice cracked halfway through. I turned my lamp that way and saw the soil shifting as though something were exhaling beneath it. The sand heaved, settled, then bulged again, each breath carrying that nauseating reek. Steam, no, not quite steam, rose in thin, twisting ribbons, the same oily shimmer that first caught our eyes. We dragged Dan back uphill, coughing and gasping. His eyes were watering, his nose bleeding slightly. He kept saying, "It's hot down there, really hot," like he couldn't believe it. When we looked again, the patch pulsed faintly, a dull amber glow under the sand. None of us spoke for a while. The desert around us was silent. No insects, no night breeze, no sound at all, but our own uneven breathing. Elise broke first. "We're not staying here," she said, her voice shaking. She started tearing down her tent, stuffing it blindly into the pack. Dan argued, said it was probably some geothermal vent, maybe natural gas seeping through fissures, but the words felt hollow. There were no vents marked anywhere near this region, and I'd camped enough to know that no hot spring or methane leak smelled like that. It was deeper, older. we hauled our gear up another quarter-mile toward a plateau of bare sandstone. The air cleared some, but the smell clung to our clothes, a ghost that wouldn't leave. We tried again to sleep, lying side by side under the stars, but I kept seeing that patch below, breathing in the dark. Once, I thought I heard a faint hiss drifting up the slope like sand sliding over glass. Elise whispered, "It's spreading." I wanted to tell her. She was imagining things, but when I looked down toward the hollow, I saw faint ripples of light tracing along the dry creek bed, small flickers like something crawling unseen through the earth. The desert seemed to shift with each pulse, and that smell rose again, thinner now, but sharper, as if the land itself were trying to warn us away. We didn't wait for morning. By 4 a.m, we'd packed the last of our things and started hauling down the narrow wash toward the truck. The stars were fading, the eastern horizon paling, but the smell, God, that smell, still drifted through the dark like a living thing. It wasn't steady anymore. It came in waves, carried by a slow, warm current that seemed to move against the wind. Sometimes it vanished completely, only to surge back stronger, enough to make our stomachs twist and eyes water. Dan walked ahead, muttering to himself, flashlight sweeping the rocks. He wanted to take one last look at the site, from a distance, to understand what we'd seen, as he put it. Elise was having none of it. "We're leaving, Dan. I'm not dying out here because you need to know why it stinks." But he didn't answer. The beam of his light drifted toward the hollow, and I followed his gaze. Down below, that patch of shimmering ground had spread, 3 times larger now, a rough oval that pulsed faintly beneath the sand. The glow was brighter, a slow rhythm like the beating of something buried alive. And then came a sound, faint but distinct, a wet, bubbling noise, as though the earth itself were boiling beneath a crust of rock. Elise started crying quietly. I could taste the smell now, acidic, metallic, almost sweet at the back of my throat. My skin prickled, and I realised the air was warmer, unnaturally so, like we were standing near an open oven. The rocks under our boots gave off a soft ticking sound as they cooled in the dawn breeze. Dan raised his phone to film it. Some reflex of curiosity, I guess, but the second he did, the smell surged again, thick enough to make us gag. A faint hissing grew louder, and a crack opened right down the centre of that glowing patch. It wasn't wide, maybe an inch or two, but it stretched fast, zigzagging across the hollow like lightning etched in reverse. Steam erupted from it, hissing and swirling, carrying that unbearable reek with it. We ran. No one spoke. No one looked back. Our footsteps echoed through the canyon like someone else was chasing us. My lungs burned, every breath a knife of hot, foul air. When we finally reached the truck, the eastern sky was streaked pink, but the smell still clung to us. Even the canvas of the tent we'd strapped to the bed reeked faintly, as if the fibres themselves had absorbed it. Dan wanted to drive closer, just for a final look before leaving the area. I shouted at him, didn't even recognise my own voice. He froze, glanced at Elise, then at me, and finally nodded. We slammed the doors, turned the key, and tore out of there, tyres spitting dust behind us. None of us said a word as the canyon walls fell away and the desert opened wide before us, silent and empty under the early sun. We drove for hours without stopping, following the dirt road until it met the narrow strip of cracked pavement that passed for a highway. Even there, miles from camp, the smell seemed to follow us. It was weaker, more like a memory than a presence, but every so often a gust of wind would roll through the open window and bring it back, sharp enough to turn our stomachs again. Elise sat hunched forward in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped tight around her pack, staring straight ahead. Dan just gripped the wheel, eyes fixed on the horizon, jaw tight. By late morning, the sun was blazing, the sky a pale, merciless blue. The farther we went, the quieter it got between us. At one point, I realised the radio was off, and had been since we'd fled the site. It felt wrong to break the silence, like speaking might invite that smell back. Finally, after a long stretch of nothing but the hum of tyres, Dan said, "It had to be geothermal." His voice was rough, uncertain. Some kind of vent, maybe hydrogen sulfide mixed with something else. Elise shook her head. That wasn't sulfur, it was alive. The word hung in the air. I didn't want to agree, but she was right. There had been rhythm in it, something pulsing under the ground, breathing, exhaling. It felt less like gas escaping rock and more like the land itself had a sickness. We stopped at a small service station near Green River to wash the gear. The old man behind the counter wouldn't come near us. He wrinkled his nose and said, "You folks hit skunk farm or something." I tried to laugh, but the sound that came out was hollow. Even after scrubbing our hands and wiping down the packs, the smell wouldn't leave. It wasn't on the surface. It was in us somehow. Every breath I took still carried a faint echo of that metallic tang. That night, we rented a cheap motel room off the highway. Elise fell asleep first, curled on top of the covers, her face turned toward the wall. Dan sat by the window with the lights off, staring out at the empty desert. I lay there, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and thinking I could still feel the faintest vibration in the floorboards, as though something deep beneath the earth was moving. Just before dawn, I woke to find Dan gone. His gear was still there, but the truck keys were missing. I rushed outside, barefoot. The parking lot was empty, except for a faint shimmer on the asphalt, where the morning dew had gathered. A patch that glistened just like the one we'd seen in the hollow. The air was still, but as I stood there, that same awful smell drifted faintly through the breeze, as if it had followed him, or all of us, out of the desert. By the time Elise woke, the truck and Dan were still gone. I didn't have to tell her what I'd smelled. She knew before I said a word. She packed her things in silence, hands trembling, and we checked out as the sky grew bright over the desert flats. The clerk handed me the receipt at arm's length, frowning. "You two smell like bad eggs," he muttered. I didn't bother to answer. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying dust and the faintest whisper of that same unbearable odour. We headed east in her car, windows cracked despite the heat. The air inside felt heavy, like it couldn't quite refresh itself. After a few miles, Elise said quietly, "He'll come back." Maybe he just needed to see it again. But her voice didn't sound convinced. Neither of us mentioned what we both feared, that the smell might have drawn him like something calling through the stone. 2 days later, I tried his phone. No answer, no voicemail either. I called again that night from a gas station in Colorado, the fluorescent lights flickering above the pumps. The moment the line went dead, I swore I caught that same low hiss I'd heard in the canyon, like sand sliding beneath glass, faint but unmistakable. I didn't call again. Weeks passed. I washed my clothes 3 times, threw out my tent, even sold my pack. Still, the smell lingered, ghost-like, faint but ever-present when the air was still. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake with the taste of rust in my mouth and the sense of warmth rising from beneath the floorboards. Elise moved back east. Said she couldn't stand the dry heat anymore. She mailed me once. A short note written in her careful looping hand. "Do you still smell it?" I didn't write back. A month later, a ranger from Emery County called. He'd found a truck abandoned off an access road near the edge of the same sandstone basin where we'd camped. The keys were still in the ignition, doors open, no sign of struggle. He said there was a strange film on the rocks nearby, thin as frost that shimmered in the sun. They thought it might be some kind of mineral bloom, something leaching up through cracks in the bedrock. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there a long while, window open, breathing the still evening air. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled low across the desert, and the wind shifted, carrying with it a familiar trace. Faint, metallic, and wrong. That night I dreamed of the hollow again, the earth breathing slow and steady under a canopy of stars. When I woke, the air in the room was warm and stale, and for one fleeting second I thought I saw the carpet rise and fall, like something deep below was exhaling, waiting for me to come back. Even now, years later, I can't smell rain without thinking of that night. The stench, the shimmer, the way the ground seemed alive. Some places, I've learned, don't want to be found. And when they speak, they don't use words. They use the air itself until you can't breathe anything else.